It's a very fine piece of work. I mean, a number of things to say. Firstly, Pablo Larraín, it's, in a way, it's a kind of conclusion of a socio-political trilogy. It's based on a stage play originally by Antonio Scarmetta. And, you heard discussed there in very good detail exactly what the film is about. Firstly, on a stylistic point of view, this whole decision to shoot the movie using U-matic, using 1983 cameras, it is interesting. The first thing that it does is it means that you can cut between the modern footage and the archive footage, and there doesn't appear to be any break between the two. And also, the film's in 4:3. It's it's 1:3. It's the kind of a boxy Academy ratio. I think the most recently, if you think about something like The Artist, that's shot in Academy, which is not generally thought of as a cinema ratio anymore. Although obviously Mixed Cutoff, I think, was shot in 1:3 as well. And some people, I think, at the beginning will have a problem because they will look at that U-matic and go, but that just looks like old television, because it really does. What that does for you is it does make the whole piece of a piece. I mean, the period detail is really, really well observed, but just the fact that the televisual aesthetic of it is so complete, it's a very bold decision, and I think it's a decision that some people initially, I know of at least one person who started watching the movie and went, hang on, I'm sorry, I'm not going to watch that, because it's just, it's aesthetically, I can't deal with that.
That's not a really good reason for walking out of a film, though. Aesthetically,
they weren't walking
so unpleasing.
They weren't walking out of a film, they were walking out of a screening at home of a film, and they said, I'm just not going to watch it. But I mean, it is
screening at home.
A screening at home.
Watching a DVD.
Exactly. Exactly.
What are you going to do tonight? I'm going to have a screening at home.
Or watching a DVD, as it's called. But I think it works. I think the decision does work, and I think that the shape of the frame, and I think that the way of using that pneumatic actually works really, really well. Although I'm just saying that some people may have an initial problem with it. I think beyond that, what's terrific about the film is it's dealing with a really, important subject. It's dealing with huge political changes. There are, to some extent, comparisons with what the Tommy Lee Jones character is going through in Lincoln, because we talked about, I said that for me, the most interesting thing about him is his character, who is a radical, learning that what he has to do is to learn compromise in order to actually get something done. Well, in the case of this, the underlying story is that there's this hideous, horrible, very real backstory, and yet along comes this advertising executive and says, yeah, but we have to throw all that out. We have to change the record. We have to change the story. We have to change the narrative. We have to turn it into essentially something that looks like a Pepsi commercial that makes people not dwell on the past, but dwell on the possibility of a future. He says the problem is most people just don't think that there can be this future, so we have to convince them through advertising terminology that there can be. So this then sits to some extent in the history of political dramas, like, for example, remember the whole thing about the Ploughman's Lunch, which was about rebranding a political ether. I mean, actually, in the case of the Ploughman's Lunch, it's sort of the flip side, because the whole thing about the Ploughman's Lunch is it's an advertising dream which doesn't exist.
I never saw the Ploughman's
Oh, okay. Well, it's a very, very interesting British movie, which you should see. You would be very fascinated by.
Would I?
Yeah, you would.
I will be then.
But particularly, in a time of referenda, there are these things in the air now, at a time in which actually compromises are having to be made in order for change to occur. This is particularly important. And obviously, as I said before when I was reviewing Lincoln, I personally find that stuff really interesting, as I know you do too.
Well, interestingly, on that subject, with the Scottish referendum coming up fairly shortly, what will be interesting to see is whether the people running the No campaign look at this, because one of the things that they did in this movie, and which they did in '88, is they made No a positive.
Yes.
So that in the promotional bits they're going, no, and they're wagging their fingers, no. But it's a good thing. You know? And I would think that it may well have some political resonance now as well.
Well, there was a lovely phrase in that interview when Gael Garcia Bernal talks about voting for no. Not voting no, but voting for no. And that's the whole point of the film, is turning the negative into a positive. And in fact, there's some very funny, despite all the very harsh political background to all this, there is some very funny interplay between the two sets of advertisements. One of the advertisements that the No campaign comes up with is a man in bed with his wife, and the wife rebuffing him by saying, and in the end he says no, and then the Yes party respond with an advert which has the wife saying yes. He says, well, look, this is the difference between us. And it actually descends to that level of kind of, bawdy advertising jargon. There is also some very, very heated debates in which some of the hardliners say, look, this is disgusting, this is disgraceful. What you are doing is completely selling out the awful legacy through which we have all lived, and you cannot win this argument by using soft drink commercial techniques. You just can't do it. So the film raises all of those ideas, but most importantly, it does it in a way which is engaging as a piece of drama. Often when you're reviewing a film, you find the need to say, well, this performance is good, or this performance is good, or that was the interesting thing about it is so much of a piece, and that is very largely to do with this overwhelming, overriding aesthetic. The fact that you do see it all through this kind of pneumatic 80s TV look. I never at any point thought, oh, that's a particularly good performance. That's a particularly interesting. I just believed in all the characters. I believed that they were all of a piece, and they were all of a piece which was part of a large historical drama which was playing itself out in a way which I understood as it was happening.